The galaxy had never seen a storm like this, a cosmic tempest that tore through the fabric of space and time itself. Stars exploded in violent bursts, their remnants scattering like dust across the endless void. Entire star systems vanished without a trace, swallowed by the shifting tides of an unknown force. For humanity, this was the final reckoning. The cataclysm had not been some random cosmic event. It was the death knell of a galaxy unprepared for the consequences of its ambition. Earth, humanity's cradle, had fallen silent, its light snuffed out like a candle in the dark. On the edge of the Carpathian star system, Captain Mara Kessler stood on the observation deck of the Starfire, gazing out into the vast nothingness that stretched beyond. The view was haunting, an expanse of darkness, scattered with the remains of what once had been vibrant systems. A skeletal crew of survivors lingered aboard the ship, some working tirelessly at their stations, others lost in the stillness of space, nursing wounds that would never heal. There had been no warning, no time to prepare. The catastrophe had come without mercy, its cause still a mystery, and the survivors, humanity's last hope, were now the galaxy's nomads, adrift in the cosmic void. "Captain, we've picked up something." Lieutenant Roan's voice crackled over the comms, pulling Kessler from her thoughts. He was stationed at the bridge, monitoring the vast reaches of space. A signal, faint, but it's definitely there, coming from the Elysium Expanse. Kessler frowned. The Elysium Expanse was a region of space previously thought to be devoid of life or technology. An area known for its electromagnetic storms, where no ship had ever ventured and returned. It was a region most avoided, for those who had dared enter had never been heard from again. Yet here was a signal, one that defied the odds. "Plot a course," Kessler ordered. "If there's something out there, it's worth investigating." The ship's engines hummed to life as the Starfire turned toward the coordinates Roan had locked in. As they made their way through the dead expanse, the crew was uneasy, each of them sensing that their lives might change forever. In the absence of hope, they had learned to survive. But now, with the signal drawing them closer, a glimmer of something, perhaps not salvation, but a chance to understand what had caused the destruction, began to stir in their hearts. The journey was slow. With limited resources, the Starfire could only manage sublight speeds, making the trip across the Elysium Expanse a drawn-out ordeal. Days passed in silence, the crew working in near isolation, their interactions minimal. Kessler spent most of her time in the ship's command center, staring out at the endless dark, pondering the future. Were they the last? Was humanity truly doomed to drift, forgotten, or could there be some way to fight back? The signal continued to pulse faintly, a beacon in the vast emptiness. Every few hours, Roan would report its progress, but each time the report sounded more urgent, more frantic. It was as if the signal were calling them in, drawing them closer to something or someone unknown. It wasn't long before the crew began to suspect that they weren't the only ones interested in the signal. "Captain," Roan's voice broke through again, this time with a tone of something resembling fear. "The signal? It's changing. It's not just a broadcast anymore. It's almost as if it's responding to us." Kessler's pulse quickened. If the signal was active, if it was intelligent, it could mean something far greater than a simple distress call. It could be a remnant of the ancient civilizations lost in the catastrophe, or, more ominously, it could be a trap set by whoever or whatever had caused it. "Hold position," Kessler commanded. "We'll proceed with caution. I want everyone on high alert. Whatever's out there, we need to be prepared for anything." As the Starfire neared the source of the signal, Kessler felt a surge of anticipation mixed with dread. They were on the cusp of discovery, but the risks were enormous. The galaxy had fallen into darkness, and they had no idea what dangers might still linger in the void. But one thing was certain, the mystery of the signal would not remain unsolved for long. Whether it led them to salvation or to their doom, They were about to uncover a truth that would change everything. As the starfire neared the source of the signal, the eerie silence of space pressed in from all sides, thick with tension. The stars, once vibrant and full of promise, now felt distant, cold pinpricks of light in a void that had swallowed all hope. The signal, growing clearer with each passing moment, was like a pulse of life in the dead expanse, but something about it felt wrong. It didn't behave like a typical distress call. There was intelligence behind it, a pattern to its rhythm, something deliberate. Coordinates locked, Captain. We're entering the Elysium expanse proper, Lieutenant Roan said, his voice taut with anticipation. Kessler leaned over the command console, her eyes narrowing. Bring us in slowly. I don't trust this place. Keep shields at full strength and scan for anything unusual. The starfire glided deeper into the expanse, its engines humbling against the backdrop of the unknown. As they approached the coordinates, the crew could feel the change in the atmosphere. A sudden, subtle shift. Static built up on the comms, then faded away. Sensors began to flicker erratically, as if the fabric of space itself were warping under some unseen force. Captain, Roan's voice trembled slightly. I'm reading something. It's massive. A structure. It's been hidden here, undetected for millennia. Kessler's breath caught in her throat. A station. Looks like it. A massive one, too. Almost like a city, but abandoned. It's surrounded by debris, old ships, broken pieces of stations, all long destroyed. Kessler frowned. There was no record of anything like this in the ship's database, no mention of such a structure ever existing in the Elysium expanse. It was as though it had been deliberately erased from history. Bring us closer, she ordered. Let's see what's left. The starfire crept toward the structure, and soon the dark silhouette of a colossal, ancient space station loomed out of the void. It looked like the remains of a forgotten civilization, its massive skeletal frame twisted and warped from centuries of neglect. The surface was pocked with holes, scars from countless battles or natural disasters. What was left of the station's once grand architecture now seemed a monument to a civilization long dead. Docking bay in sight. Preparing for landing, Roan said, his voice laced with awe. Kessler gave a sharp nod, her mind racing. Whoever had built this station was far beyond humanity's capabilities. The technology they had unearthed in the depths of space seemed to defy logic, as if it had been designed by gods. But as they approached, a darker thought crept into Kessler's mind. What if the builders hadn't just vanished? What if they had been wiped out by something more powerful, something that still lingered? The landing bay doors slid open with a hiss, and the starfire settled onto the dusty floor of the derelict station. The crew prepared for what they might find. Weapons were checked, equipment secured, and every man and woman on board knew that this could be their last moment in the living world. Kessler stood at the front, her hand resting on the cool surface of the command console. Stay sharp. If this place has been abandoned for as long as it seems, we don't know what we're walking into. Roan activated the external comms. The station is silent, Captain, no signs of life. That's what worries me, Kessler muttered. Keep the scanners running. We move in teams. No one goes off alone. As the crew disembarked, the station's interior was a ghostly silence, each footstep echoing through empty corridors. The walls were covered in strange, alien symbols, impossible to decipher. And yet, as Kessler passed through them, she felt a pulse, a strange hum beneath her skin, a connection to something greater. In the heart of the station, deep within the bowels of its forgotten halls, they found what they were searching for, a dark, pulsing object embedded in the center of a large chamber. The rune of ether. It shimmered with an otherworldly light, radiating power beyond anything they had ever encountered. A single pulse of energy burst from it, illuminating the room with a blinding brilliance. Kessler felt her heart race as she reached out, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. Captain, don't touch it, Roan shouted, his voice tinged with panic. But it was too late. The moment Kessler's fingers brushed the surface of the rune, her mind was flooded with visions, fractured, impossible images of an ancient war that had raged across the galaxy. A war that had consumed civilizations and left nothing but devastation in its wake. The rune wasn't just an artifact. It was a key, and it was calling to something, a force that had once destroyed the galaxy and now, with Kessler's touch, had awakened again. The rune of Aether pulsed in Kessler's hand, its energy surging through her veins. The visions had come fast, overwhelming her with images of destruction, of a galaxy torn apart by forces too vast for human comprehension. But one image lingered, a colossal entity, drifting in the void, its form shifting between the stars. It was a being of unimaginable power, the cause of the cataclysm that had reduced entire civilizations to dust. "Captain?" Roan's voice cut through the haze of her thoughts. His tone was frantic, and Kessler blinked, trying to regain focus. She felt dizzy, as if the very fabric of reality had been altered around her. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice shaky. She pulled her hand away from the rune, but the pull of its energy remained. It whispered to her, its call like a distant promise. "We need to leave. Now." As the crew hurried to board the Starfire, the station seemed to pulse with life around them, the walls groaning and vibrating as though they were alive. The feeling of being watched intensified, a sense of presence that none of them could shake. Kessler could feel the rune's power still coursing through her, like a storm building in her mind, threatening to burst forth. She had to control it, but the sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. An immense force, ancient and deep, stretching into the very core of the universe. "Captain, we've got company." Roan's voice came over the comms, breaking through her spiraling thoughts. "Noxian ships? Several of them. They're moving in fast." Kessler's heart skipped a beat. The Noxians. She had hoped they might be safe from the warlords of the galaxy, but it seemed their timing couldn't have been worse. The Noxians had been hunting for the rune for as long as anyone could remember, and now they had found it, just as the Starfire had. "Full power to engines. Get us out of here," Kessler barked, but her orders were met with an ominous silence. "Engines are malfunctioning, Captain," Roan said, his voice tense. "Something's interfering with the systems. I can't get them to respond." The entire ship shuddered violently as the Starfire's shields flickered. Kessler gripped the nearest console, steadying herself as she glanced at the viewscreen. In the distance, the Noxian fleet loomed, black silhouettes against the star-filled expanse. Their ships were sleek, designed for intimidation, their hulls lined with weapons of unimaginable destruction. The Noxians were ruthless, and with the rune now in their sights, they would stop at nothing to claim it. "We don't have time for this," Kessler muttered under her breath. She turned toward the rest of the crew. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. I'll handle the rune." As she made her way toward the ship's central chamber, the pulse of the rune grew stronger. The energy it emitted seemed to resonate with something within her, something primal and untamed. She could feel its power beckoning her to wield it, to bend it to her will. But it was dangerous, she knew it, but she couldn't help herself. The galaxy had been shattered, humanity was on the brink of extinction, and if the rune could offer a chance at survival, at vengeance, then she would seize it. "Captain, the Noxians are closing in," Roan warned. She entered the central chamber and stood before the rune, its dark energy swirling in the air like a living thing. Her mind was a storm of thoughts, but one stood out among them all. The Noxians were coming, and if she didn't act fast, they would claim the power that could decide the fate of the galaxy. Without thinking, Kessler reached out again, her fingers brushing the rune. This time, the energy didn't overwhelm her. It merged with her, sinking deep into her consciousness. Her body shook with the intensity of it, but she held on, focusing all her willpower on controlling the power flowing through her. The Starfire lurched as the ship's systems surged back to life, and Kessler realized, with a shock, that it wasn't just the engines that had come back online. The rune was now affecting everything, every weapon, every shield, every sensor. She had taken control, at least for the moment. "Full power to weapons, Lieutenant," she commanded. "Prepare to engage." Outside the Starfire, the Noxian ships closed in, their weapons charging. It was clear they had no intention of negotiating. As the first wave of energy blasts streaked toward the ship, Kessler braced herself. She could feel the power of the rune within her, a surge of energy that made her feel invincible. In an instant, the Starfire's weapons fired in a coordinated blast, the energy from the rune amplifying every shot. The Noxian ships were caught off guard as the Starfire's firepower ripped through their hulls, disabling their weapons and shields. But the enemy was relentless. They wouldn't be stopped so easily. "We need to get out of here, Captain," Roan yelled. Kessler hesitated, but only for a moment. The Starfire wasn't going to survive another round of combat with the Noxian fleet. She could feel the rune pulling at her, urging her to take the ship to the next level. "Hold on," she muttered. "This is going to get ugly." With a deep breath, she pushed the ship's engines to the limit, using the rune's power to propel them toward the nearby Inferno Nebula, a massive, chaotic storm of stars and black holes. It was a gamble, but it was their only chance. The Noxians would follow, but the nebula might just be their only escape. The Starfire tore through space, racing toward the fiery clouds of the nebula, leaving the Noxians behind for now. But Kessler knew that the storm wasn't just ahead, it was already inside her, and the rune, now a part of her, was changing everything. The Starfire plunged into the Inferno Nebula, its engines roaring as the ship pushed through the thick, swirling clouds of ionized gas and turbulent gravity wells. The once dead expanse of space seemed alive around them, each shift of the nebula threatening to tear the ship apart. The chaos outside mirrored the storm that raged inside Kessler's mind, the rune's energy growing stronger with every passing second. "Captain, the Noxians aren't giving up," Roan's voice echoed through the comms. "Their ships are closing in on our tail. They're not going to let us escape this easily." Kessler glanced at the view screen, watching as the Noxian fleet fought their way through the nebula. Their ships were built for warfare, but the storm they were entering was unlike any battle they had ever fought. The energy fields of the nebula made sensor readings erratic, but the Noxians' relentless pursuit made it clear they were determined to capture the Starfire and the rune. "We need to shake them," Kessler muttered under her breath. She could feel the weight of the rune, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath her skin, urging her to do something. The rune had shown her visions of a power beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of, and now she understood its true potential. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a bridge to something ancient, something lost. "Captain, I'm reading gravitational anomalies ahead," Roan reported. "Black holes, small ones, but they're too close together. If we get too close, we'll be pulled in." Kessler didn't hesitate. She knew the risks. They were in a race against time, and the Noxians would stop at nothing to claim what they had. She had no choice but to gamble everything on the storm ahead. "Plot a course through the anomalies. Full throttle. We'll use the gravity wells to our advantage." Roan hesitated. "Are you sure about this, Captain? It's a suicide run. We're talking about navigating through black holes." "I'm sure," Kessler said firmly. Her voice was steady, but inside, she could feel the rune's power thrumming, urging her to trust it, to use it. This wasn't just about survival, it was about fighting back. With a single command, Kessler sent the Starfire plunging toward the dense cluster of gravitational anomalies. The ship lurched as the engines flared, straining to push them through the nebula's chaos. Kessler's grip tightened on the console, feeling the room surge within her. The energy it offered was intoxicating, a river of raw power that could bend space itself, but she had to stay focused. One misstep, and the Starfire would be lost. Outside, the Noxian fleet followed, their ships maneuvering around the nebula's dangers but still closing the distance. They didn't understand the threat they were charging into. Kessler wasn't sure she fully understood it herself, but she was about to find out. "Here we go," Kessler said, more to herself than anyone else. The Starfire shot toward the nearest black hole, its trajectory a perfect line for the gravitational pull. At the last moment, Kessler yanked the controls, twisting the ship's path and using the immense gravity to slingshot them toward the next anomaly. The ship bucked and groaned as it was pulled, nearly losing its course several times, but Kessler's hands remained steady, guiding them through the chaos. In the blink of an eye, they were in the heart of the storm. The Starfire was thrown into the gravitational turbulence, tossed between black holes and swirling gas clouds. The Noxian ships, less nimble, were caught in the wake of the storm. One ship was ripped apart by the gravity of a nearby singularity, its debris scattering like shattered glass. But more were still behind them, relentless in their pursuit. Kessler's mind raced. The rune was guiding her, its power now intertwined with her own senses. She could feel the energy of the nebula, the pulse of the black holes, the swirling chaos around her. It was as if she could see the fabric of space itself, a tapestry of possibility, and she knew exactly how to use it. "Captain, the gravitic stress is too much," Roan shouted, his voice barely audible over the ship's alarms. "We can't take much more of this." Kessler didn't respond. Instead, she reached deep within herself, tapping into the rune's power. She could sense the flow of energy in the nebula, the subtle ripples in space-time that could be bent, controlled. If she pushed harder, the Starfire could use the black holes themselves as weapons, but the risk was enormous. "Hold on," Kessler whispered, barely aware of the pounding of her heart. She reached out, not with her hands, but with her mind, extending herself into the chaotic energy field around the ship. The rune's power surged, and she could feel it. The Starfire was becoming an extension of herself, an entity tied to the very fabric of the universe. Space bent to her will. With a single thought, Kessler sent the Starfire plunging toward a nearby black hole, the ship's speed increasing as it used the singularity's pull to slingshot them back into the heart of the nebula. The Noxians were too slow to react, their ships caught in the gravitational forces that tore them apart. Another Noxian vessel vanished into a black hole, leaving only its echo behind. The remaining Noxian ships tried to change course, but it was too late. The Starfire surged forward, escaping the gravity wells and plunging into the relative calm of the nebula's deeper regions. For now, they had escaped, but Kessler knew it wasn't over. The rune had granted them a temporary reprieve, but its power was drawing something else, something far darker, closer. The ancient force that had caused the galaxy's destruction was stirring again, and Kessler had no idea what it would want from her next. The Starfire drifted through the dense fog of the Inferno Nebula, the distant glow of dying stars barely visible through the veil of swirling gases and gravitational anomalies. The chaos of the nebula had muted everything, cloaking the ship in an eerie stillness. The immediate danger from the Noxian fleet was gone, but the ship's crew was far from relieved. They knew they had only bought themselves a momentary reprieve. Kessler stood before the command console, her fingers hovering just above the controls. The rune, still pulsing with untapped power, was heavy in her thoughts. She could feel its presence, as if it were a part of her now. Every decision, every move, seemed to come with its influence, guiding her, pulling her toward something larger than herself. "Captain, our shields are down to 30%. Roan's voice broke through her thoughts, sharp with urgency. "We're not going to last much longer if we don't find somewhere to hide or make repairs." "We're not hiding," Kessler said, her voice low but firm. "We've come too far to run. We need to regroup and figure out what we're dealing with." "Captain, the Noxian fleet is regrouping," Roan added. "They'll be coming for us. And I'm picking up something strange. It's faint, but I'm detecting an energy signature not far from here. Something massive." "Anything about it?" Kessler asked, her mind racing. It's hard to get a clear reading, but whatever it is, it's enormous, and it's alive. Roan's tone was hesitant, as if he didn't fully believe his own words. It could be another station, or something even worse. Kessler felt a shiver of unease, the rune's power flickering in response to her growing anxiety. Set a course. Let's see what we're dealing with. The crew worked quickly to adjust the ship's course, guiding the Starfire through the nebula's tumultuous heart. The space around them felt like a living thing, alive with energy, alive with the unknown. As the ship moved deeper into the fog, the energy signature grew stronger. It was unmistakable now, a massive, pulsing source of power, and Kessler could feel it. The rune was resonating with it, as if drawn to it, as if it knew what it was. Soon the source came into view, and what they saw froze them in their tracks. It wasn't a station or a ship, it was a gigantic entity floating in the heart of the nebula. Its form was a vast, undulating mass of energy, wrapped in dark tendrils of shadow. It pulsed like a heart, each beat sending ripples through the fabric of space around it. Its size defied logic, far larger than any ship or station. Its surface a shifting kaleidoscope of energy that seemed to shimmer and distort, as though it was both present and not present at the same time. "By the stars," Roan whispered, his voice filled with awe. "What is that?" Kessler could feel the rune's power grow more intense in her mind, urging her forward, pulling her closer to the entity. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I think it's what we've been looking for." A low hum filled the ship, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the entity itself. It was a strange, resonating frequency, one that made Kessler's skin crawl. The room seemed to respond, a gentle thrum vibrating beneath her fingertips, as if answering the call of the strange presence before them. Suddenly, a voice, a deep, ancient voice, echoed inside her mind. "You have come. The one who awakens the heart of the abyss. The rune has chosen you." Kessler stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was not from any human, not from any being she could identify. It was a force of nature, a presence beyond time, and it knew her name. What is this?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the entity could hear her. "You are the catalyst, the one who will either restore or destroy what was lost. The rune calls to you. It demands your obedience. Will you heed it?" Kessler's mind raced. She had come so far, and yet now, with the full weight of the rune's power and the voice that spoke to her, she felt unprepared. This entity, this thing, was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. It was older than the stars themselves, and its power, its influence, was unlike anything she had ever known. "We can't," she began, her voice faltering. "We can't control this. We don't understand it." The entity's voice echoed again, more insistent this time, like the roar of a storm. "You do not need to understand it, child. You only need to obey. The old powers must return, and the rune will guide you. You will wield its might and reshape the galaxy, or the galaxy will fall to ruin." Kessler's heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she almost felt as though the entity's presence was inside her, twisting her thoughts, clouding her judgment. It wasn't just the rune calling to her now, it was this ancient force, urging her to accept its power and shape the future in its image. "Captain," Roan's voice broke through the haze of her thoughts. "Captain, we're picking up more Noxian ships. They've found us." Kessler snapped back to reality. The entity was still watching, waiting, its energy pulsing steadily like a heartbeat. She had a choice to make. "Prepare for battle," Kessler said, her voice shaking but resolute. "We don't know what this is, but we're going to find out, and we're going to survive." The Starfire's weapons powered up, ready to defend against the Noxian fleet that was closing in. But Kessler knew the real battle wasn't just with the Noxians. The true test lay ahead, with the heart of the abyss and the rune itself. The Starfire's weapons hummed to life, but Kessler could hardly focus on the incoming Noxian fleet. The ancient entity that hovered before them, its vast presence pressing in on her mind, was the true threat now. The rune pulsed beneath her skin, its power woven into her very being, urging her forward. Yet something deep inside Kessler's chest told her that embracing the entity's call could be her undoing. The Noxians were closing in fast, their ships cutting through the nebulous chaos with a relentless precision. Despite the formidable odds, Kessler knew they couldn't just fight their way out. The power they were up against, both the Noxians and the cosmic force before them, was far beyond what the Starfire could withstand. "Captain, the Noxians are positioning themselves for an attack." Roan's voice crackled through the comms. "We can't outrun them in this nebula, and with our shields barely functional, we won't last long." Kessler's thoughts raced. The Starfire was outnumbered and outgunned, and she could feel the rune growing heavier with each passing moment. Its call was overwhelming now, and the strange presence in the nebula seemed to be anticipating something, waiting for her to make her move. The entity, whatever it was, wasn't just watching, it was testing her. "Hold on," Kessler muttered, gritting her teeth. She turned away from the command console and walked toward the center of the ship, where the rune had been placed in a secure containment chamber. It was a strange, otherworldly relic, but its power was undeniable. The energy it radiated seemed to pulse with her own heartbeat. "Captain, what are you doing?" Roan's voice came again, now tinged with concern. "I'm thinking," Kessler replied, though the words felt hollow even to her. She could already feel the pull of the entity again, its voice reaching out through her thoughts. "Come closer. The rune beckons. You must choose." It wasn't a choice, not really. The rune was demanding her attention, calling her like a moth to a flame, offering something beyond the comprehension of the galaxy. But what would it cost her? What would it cost humanity? Kessler didn't know. She only knew that if she didn't take control now, everything would be lost. The Noxians would destroy them, and the galaxy would fall into chaos, and the entity would remain a distant memory. "Activate the containment field," she ordered, her voice unsteady. The hum of the ship's systems filled her ears as Roan complied. Kessler stepped into the chamber, her mind filled with the weight of the decision before her. The rune floated in the center, dark energy swirling around it like a storm trapped in a crystal. Her fingers trembled as she reached out for it, but this time she hesitated. The power she had tapped into before had been instinctual, guided by a force she couldn't fully comprehend. But now, in the face of extinction, the rune's call felt different, urgent, demanding. The entity's voice echoed through her mind once more. "The time is now. The power to reshape all of existence is within your grasp. All you need to do is surrender. Let go of your fear." "Fear?" Kessler whispered, almost to herself. "What if I'm making the wrong choice?" "There is no wrong choice, only destiny." The voice was soothing now, like a lullaby. "The galaxy is broken. The old powers have failed. You are the one who will fix it, if you accept me." Her heart pounded in her chest, the rune now thrumming beneath her fingers. Her mind teetered on the edge of something vast, something beyond comprehension. Kessler could feel it, her identity, her essence, merging with the rune. The energy was building, surging, consuming her. She wasn't just in control anymore. The rune was controlling her, guiding her towards something greater, something eternal. And then she realized. The choice wasn't about survival. It was about power, absolute, unyielding power. The entity in the nebula wasn't offering her a way out. It was offering her a means to ascend. The blackened mass before her flickered with energy, and suddenly the ship shuddered. Roan's voice came again, desperate. "Captain, we're being pulled toward the entity. Something's happening. The gravity wells are intensifying. We can't escape." But Kessler wasn't listening anymore. The rune's energy had overtaken her, and the deep, ancient voice in her mind echoed louder now, drowning out all other sound. She felt her body flood with new knowledge, ancient, primal energy. She could sense the very fabric of the universe, every star, every galaxy, every fragment of existence, laid bare before her, and she knew. She knew what had to be done. Her fingers clasped tightly around the rune as she spoke, her voice full of a quiet, otherworldly certainty. I accept. In that instant, everything changed. The ship lurched violently, its engines sputtering in protest as the energy from the rune flooded every system. The power of the nebula itself seemed to shift, the black holes warping and pulsing in response to her command. The Noxian ships, still in pursuit, began to veer off course, their hulls twisting and distorting under the influence of the new force that had awakened in Kessler. Outside the Starfire, the nebula began to change, its turbulent energy quieting. The black holes, once threatening, seemed to bend to her will, shifting away as the entity's presence grew more intense. And in the vastness of space, Kessler realized that she had become something more than human. She had become the force that would either save or doom them all. Kessler stood at the helm, the Starfire trembling as the newly unleashed power coursed through her. The rune, now embedded deep within her consciousness, throbbed with an intensity that shook the very fabric of her being. It was as if every star, every atom, were whispering their secrets to her, offering her control over the cosmos itself. Her heart raced, but her mind was clear. She could feel the immense energy of the entity resonating with the rune, creating a symbiotic connection that had merged her consciousness with something far beyond human understanding. She was no longer just the captain of a ship. She was the vessel of something much greater, an ancient force that had been waiting for this moment. The Noxian fleet, which had been relentlessly pursuing them, was now in chaos. Ships that had once been coordinated and precise were now veering off course, their systems malfunctioning, their crews unable to respond. The power of the nebula, of the black holes and swirling gravitic fields, seemed to bend under Kessler's will, her influence spreading outward like an invisible hand. "Captain, we can't just," Roan's voice crackled through the comms, but he fell silent as he must have felt the shift in the air. "What did you do?" "The whole nebula. It's changing." Kessler's fingers tightened around the console. She could sense the Noxian ships scattered and weak. They were still trying to regroup, but she could feel them. She could see them, as if the ship's sensors were no longer needed. The energy within her had unlocked a new awareness, a new perception of space itself. "The nebula isn't just energy," Kessler muttered, mostly to herself. "It's a conduit. The black holes, they're not just destroying things. They're creating them." "What are you talking about?" Roan's voice was edged with fear. "Captain, we've lost contact with most of the fleet. There are ships disappearing, vanishing into the black holes." "I know," Kessler replied, her voice distant. She wasn't just hearing Roan now. She was hearing the universe. The nebula, the ships, even the Noxian vessels. Everything was connected in ways she had never understood before. And she knew, deep down, that the choice she had made was only the beginning. Suddenly, a wave of energy burst from the entity at the heart of the nebula, a ripple that spread outward with a speed that defied the laws of physics. Kessler's breath caught in her throat as the ship shuddered violently, the power threatening to tear the Starfire apart. Yet she felt no fear. She understood now, this wasn't just destruction, it was a transformation. The universe itself was being remade, and she was at the center of it. "Captain, where?" Roan began again, but the words were cut off as the comm systems began to sputter, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of energy flooding the ship. Kessler closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on the sensation of the rune within her. It was guiding her, offering her insight into what was coming. The Noxians had no idea what they were dealing with. The Starfire had become more than just a ship. It had become an extension of herself, a tool of creation and destruction. But Kessler knew that this power came at a cost. There were no more simple decisions. There were no more easy choices. What she was about to do would change everything, not just for humanity, but for every living being in the galaxy. Her voice was calm when she spoke again, though the weight of her words hung heavy. Roan, prepare for the final phase. The Noxians need to be stopped, and I know how to do it. She paused, letting the words sink in. The crew was silent, the weight of the situation settling over them like a cloud of dread. You're talking about using the energy of the black holes, aren't you? Roan's voice was filled with disbelief. Kessler nodded slowly, her eyes still closed as she focused on the vast power around her. The entity here, it's not just some ancient force. It's a guardian, a remnant of the old universe. It's been waiting for a catalyst, waiting for me to give it life again. It wants to restore what was lost, but not in a way humanity would ever understand. Kessler opened her eyes, her gaze steely with purpose. We're going to use the black holes to send a message. Not just to the Noxians, but to anyone who dares to threaten us. The ship's systems flickered as she began to channel the rune's energy. The black holes, which had once been symbols of doom, were now instruments of power, tools that could rewrite the fabric of reality itself. Captain, we're about to break through the event horizon of one of the largest black holes, Roan warned. We can't. It's the only way, Kessler interrupted. She reached forward, placing her hand on the console, feeling the surge of energy coalesce beneath her fingertips. The Starfire surged forward, pulled by an invisible force toward the closest black hole, but this wasn't a suicidal dive. This was Kessler wielding the energy of the very fabric of space, guiding the ship with an ease that only someone fully attuned to the rune could manage. We're going to warp reality itself, she whispered. We're going to send a message they'll never forget. The ship's engines screamed in protest as they crossed the threshold of the black hole's event horizon. Time itself seemed to slow, bending around them as Kessler's mind expanded, reaching out through the very core of the galaxy. The Noxian ships, still scattered and confused, were suddenly drawn into the gravitational pull of the black hole, their hulls twisting and warping as they were consumed by the vast, insatiable force. And then, in the heart of the storm, Kessler did what no human had ever done before. She rewrote the universe's rules. The Noxian fleet was obliterated, their ships reduced to cosmic dust, vanishing without a trace. But the message had been sent. The universe would no longer remain the same. Kessler opened her eyes, and for a moment, everything was still. The Starfire hung motionless in the heart of the black hole's event horizon, suspended in a place where time and space no longer followed their familiar rules. The energy from the rune and the entity had woven together to form a new reality, a reality that she now controlled. She could feel the galaxy, every star, every distant planet, as though they were an extension of herself. The Noxian fleet had been reduced to nothingness, their ships erased from existence in a flash of unimaginable power. But the act of rewriting the universe came with its own consequences. The black holes, once chaotic forces of destruction, had been twisted into new tools, new sources of energy, but the ripple effect had been immense. The fabric of reality was still adjusting to the changes she had wrought. Space itself trembled. Kessler glanced around the bridge. Roan and the crew were staring at the redouts, their faces pale as they processed what had just happened. For them, this moment was a mixture of awe and terror. They had witnessed a force of nature, an act that no human was ever meant to wield. Captain, Roan's voice trembled. What have you done? Kessler turned toward him, her expression unwavering. I've reset the balance, she said quietly. I've shown the universe that it is not ruled by blind destruction, but by the will of those who choose to shape it. But this power, it's too much for anyone to control. It's not about control, Kessler interrupted, her voice gaining strength. It's about responsibility. The galaxy needed someone to act, and I answered. We're not just survivors anymore, Roan. We are the architects of a new era. The ship shuddered again, this time with a subtle tremor, as if responding to Kessler's words. The rune, still embedded deep within her, pulsed in synchrony with the energy flowing through the Starfire. It had become part of her, and through it, she could sense the changes unfolding across the galaxy. The black holes, now stabilized, were no longer just destructive forces. They were interconnected, forming a web that linked distant regions of space, creating pathways that could transport entire fleets and resources across the cosmos. The nebula is stabilizing, Roan said, looking at the redouts. The black holes they're becoming a network, and the gravitational disturbances, everything is aligning. Kessler nodded. That's the key. The Noxians weren't just a threat to us, they were a threat to everything. And the entity, it knew. It offered me the power to reshape things, to create something that could restore balance. But we're just beginning. This network of energy, it will allow us to rebuild, to reconnect the fractured pieces of the galaxy. But at what cost? Roan's voice was soft now, filled with the weight of the realization. Kessler paused, staring out at the vast expanse of stars beyond the ship's windows. She could feel the remnants of the old universe clinging to the edges of her consciousness. The memories of civilizations long gone, their histories and stories now fading into the black void. There were still dangers ahead, still remnants of chaos and destruction, but she also felt the stirrings of hope. The universe wasn't lost, it was changing. Humanity was no longer the mere remnants of a dying species. They were the progenitors of something greater. We're going to have to guide it, Kessler said, her voice firm now. This new order won't just appear by itself. It will take time, effort, and choices, but humanity will lead the way. The crew exchanged looks of uncertainty. They had followed Kessler into the unknown, but the unknown had grown far more vast and complicated than they had ever imagined. The power Kessler had wielded was not something that could be easily understood, and the ramifications of her actions were still unfolding. The universe had been altered, but the path ahead was uncertain. Would this new order be one of peace, or would it devolve into another cycle of conflict? What now? Roan asked quietly. Kessler turned to face him, her eyes calm but filled with a newfound purpose. Now we rebuild. We make sure that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated. We become the shepherds of this new universe, ensuring that it's one of balance, not destruction. For a moment, the bridge was silent. The weight of Kessler's words settled over the crew. The universe had changed, and so had they. No longer merely survivors, they had become something more, something greater. They were the architects of a new reality, one that would shape the future of all life. Kessler stood tall, her mind still humming with the rune's energy. She could feel the pulse of the galaxy, the ebb and flow of the stars, and in that moment, she knew that they were on the cusp of something monumental. The old era was over. A new era had begun. Prepare to set course, she said. We have a galaxy to rebuild. And as the Starfire slipped away from the heart of the nebula, traveling toward the unknown reaches of the universe, the crew knew they were no longer simply running from destruction. They were carrying the torch of rebirth. The stars themselves had fallen, but now they were rising again,